Okay, we welcome you all, and I think you all realize you're in for a really good treat today. This team, Dorothy, DeAngelo, and Sue Greenhagen, are always coming up with new things, and this I think will be this will be a really good one. And as you look at the programs, I think we did give you a variety of things coming up this time. If you look ahead, we have coming up next month Diane Van Slyke, who you probably don't know, but she and her husband live in Bouteville, and she's going to talk about the Shenango Canal. Well, I didn't know much about that, but I did a little reading, and this was, back in the 1830s, an incredible engineering feat. They decided that they would tell the New York State government that it would be really good to have a canal that would go from Binghamton up to the Erie Canal in Utica. It would allow them to put all of this stuff, all the materials and goods on boats and get it up all over the place. Well, it took 19 years, and finally New York State came through with $1 million. Now, of course, being New York State, the project cost $2.5 million, but they got it done. They had to raise the canal. You had to go, the boat had to be raised 700 feet to go from Binghamton up to Bouteville, the high point, and then 300 feet down. So all kinds of things they had to build to make this happen. Well, come next time and see how they did this. They were doing it with picks and shovels and willing hand and a few animals. And paying their workers the outrageous rate of $11 a month, and they got this done in 2 years. And if you're wondering why anybody would work for $11 a month, maybe some of you farmers have done that. It was 3 times the rate in Europe. These people, laborers came, many of them from Scotland and from Ireland. So that's coming. We have Backstreet Mary, or Mary Masseur, coming. And she was going to come last year and had some problems. And she's going to be talking about digital age things. How do we store these things? The things that you know and have done in pictures. How do we store that? How do we keep it for future generations? And do we have to keep re-recording it? And so, yes, we do. She'll talk about that. In April, we have one of our rare Saturday meetings in April. And Bill Casey and Joanne Casey will come and talk about medical care in Fabius. And they've worked on this, and you know them. They're meticulous, and they get the facts. And they'll be talking about some people, doctors you know, and nurses you know, and probably a lot of them you don't know. May, Linda Myers comes with her group. That's going to be good. Women on the Farm? No, don't look like that. Always a good show, but again, talking about, what was it like? We did this last year. We had an extremely good response. We want to kind of finish it up, kind of a second helping. And then in June, we'll take you this far. I want to give Sandy a lot of credit for lining up some of these things, and this is one of the things that she worked on. We have somebody coming named William Smullen, and he is he's at the Syracuse University right now, but he has been chief of staff for Colin Powell. So here's a guy, we sort of go from Fabius area, and now we're looking at the whole world. This, I think, should really be good. So this is coming up. If you didn't get one of these, we got some back there, and we'd be happy to have you take one, mark your calendars. We got a lot of different things coming up. At any rate, today we have people who need no introduction. You need no introduction, but at any rate, Dorothy DeAngelo, you know, and of course Sue Greenhagen, you know, and they have found some things to tell us about some folks who reside beneath the sod in Oakwood Cemetery.
Okay, now if I could just, I can't seem to get this table situated in a way that,
What can I do for you?
well, maybe move that end around towards the front a little bit.
Front?
And,
I'm plugging anything.
no, don't step on anything. electrocute yourself. All right,
Not
maybe I
good.
can, maybe I can
We'll let the
handle it.
state do that.
Yeah. All right, we'll see if I can do it this way.
Okay now?
I think so.
Okay.
Well,
This is called Live Oaks and Dead Folks.
okay, where
They're
are the
tight.
lights? Maybe we have the lights off. That would help a little bit.
I just moved that, Chuck. I just
Okay,
checked
Live
that.
Oaks and Dead Folks. What a catchy title. What does it mean? Well, we're going to take a virtual tour of historic Oakwood Cemetery. Now, let's see, we got to get started, so let's go over to Comstock Avenue in Syracuse. You know, just drive your car right over there. Go right in that gate there. Now, what you have to do is look for the signs. They'll be up, tour, arrow, follow the signs. And I'll tell you, here we go. This is how you get to where you have to be. Here's the Comstock entrance. Okay, you gotta go here and down here. Go across here, here, down around here, oops, here, and then down here, and then go, make a right-hand turn, go up here, and wind up here. Follow the signs, it's easier. So what we're doing is, we're heading down the lane, and we're looking for the mortuary chapel of Oakwood Cemetery. Come around the corner, and there it is. Beautiful, beautiful building. And you know the old postcards from 100 years ago? Building hasn't changed, maybe the landscaping has changed a little bit, but it's still the same mortuary chapel. And I have to introduce your tour guides for this afternoon. That's Sue on the left, and if I got that right, Dorothy, yes, the intelligent-looking one on the right. So what we usually do is have Dorothy come out and just kind of tell the group what's going on and you know, get everybody oriented to what we're going to be doing. So I'll turn it over to her. She's out there. I don't know, she's someplace out. There she is with a hat. She's getting ready to get out and talk. So there you go. Are you ready? There she is.
Lewis Carroll, the author, said, "Begin at the beginning, go till you come to the end, and then stop." So that's what we're going to do. Our tour of Oakwood Cemetery will actually start at the chapel. That's our beginning. But first, I have a little background before we get to the chapel, and it's about Oakwood. It was opened and dedicated in November of 1859, just over 100 years ago. Now, there were originally only 92 acres, but with the addition of its little sister Morningside, there are now approximately 160 acres total. Now, as churchyards in the city centers filled up, there was a movement to relocate the final resting place to an area away from the hustle and bustle of the thriving city. And this was called the Rural Cemetery Movement and was begun in the 1830s. And it was under the guidance of the Syracuse mayor, Elias Leavenworth, and his businessman partner, Hamilton White. And by the way, they're both buried in Oakwood. Now, excuse me, land was purchased. New York City landscape gardener Howard Daniels was hired, and a rural cemetery was created about 1.5 miles southeast of the center of Syracuse. So we're now at the beginning. Oh, but wait, we need a structure, a welcoming building as you enter the cemetery. And we have what they called a mortuary chapel and receiving vault. It was built a few years after the cemetery was opened, and it was dedicated in 1880. When it was built, it was at the entrance of the cemetery, but when Interstate Route 81 was constructed in 1961, the entrance was closed and a new entrance was built on Comstock Avenue. The building was designed by local architect Joseph Lyman Silsby as a protected place for services. Mr. Silsby went on to be the future teacher of the world-famous architect Frank Lloyd Wright. And Silsbee, too, is buried in Oakwood Cemetery. Now, the building is described as medieval Gothic with Romanesque elements, a 70-foot tower of Onondaga limestone, and a carriage portico in the front. The interior was finished with Georgia pine and cherry wood in the East Lake style. It was an example of Victorian elegance appropriate to the time and place. Now, presently, the building is vacant and in very fragile condition. HOCPA, Historic Oakwood Cemetery Preservation Association, recently had the roof replaced and plywood painted windows where the stained glass windows were originally built. The massive front doors no longer open to welcome visitors. Vandalism is a never-ending. So, with our introduction to the chapel, we'll begin our tour of the City of the Silent, Historic Oakwood Cemetery. Would you like your water?
Okay, now, I hope everybody's ready, because Dorothy's the one that leads these tours. You gotta keep moving to keep up with her. Well, you know, I don't want any stragglers. See this kid? This young man happens to be Dorothy's great-grandson, who's 12 years old and is very excited about cemetery history.
Yes.
Okay, so the first stop on our tour, we have to go up this hill, and we're gonna stop at the canopied tomb of Amos P. Granger, and it's a canopied tomb because it's opened. It is a canopy. He and Amos and his wife Charlotte are buried underneath. And from the old history of Oakwood, that's what it looked like originally. Just saying, except that the cross at the top is now gone. And Amos Granger, he was quite a man. Born in Connecticut and made the westward migration to central New York. In fact, in 1811, he came to Manlius. He served in the War of 1812. And in 1820, he actually moved to the city of Syracuse. Now, Amos Granger was an eloquent voice for abolition, anti-slavery. In 1854, he was elected to Congress. And he was a part of the opposition party. He wasn't a Democrat, he was kind of a Whig, but the Whigs were fading rapidly. And in 1856, he was reelected in the new Republican Party. Now, again, as I said, the anti-slavery movement in central New York was going hot and heavy. And Amos Granger gets into the House of Representatives. And the man could speak. I have to give him credit. The man was an orator. And I just want to read you a little paragraph that he spoke on the floor of the House of Representatives in April of 1856 concerning slavery. Sir, if this glorious Republican Constitution of this glorious land of liberty, the asylum of the oppressed, this home of the brave, and this land of the free, takes sides with slavery, then I confess I do not understand it. Sir, the Constitution, both in spirit and express terms, repudiates slavery and positively bars its existence. Slavery is war, open war on the rights of man. It is death to the rights of man inalienable. Its very name was offensive to the convention that formed the Constitution and was denied a record. Slavery in the Constitution, sir, it would be like engrafting wormwood onto the tree of liberty. The man could talk. He could get his point across. Died in 1866. He lived to see the end of the Civil War and the abolition of slavery. And his was one of the most eloquent voices. In fact, one of the New York newspapers, the New York Tribune, when he died, now this is a New York City newspaper, wrote, General Granger was an upright and brave man. His anti-slavery record is without a flaw, and he lived to see his principles triumphantly embodied in the Constitution. We place his name in the long roll of the true leaders of reform in New York. Salute you, Mr. Granger. Well, I'm glad we have to move on, and I'm glad everybody's paying attention, why some people are even taking pictures, and some people are taking notes. Oh my gosh, even Dorothy's paying attention. Oh, man. Oh wow. Okay, so moving just up the hill from Mr. Granger, we come to the plot of the Dennison family. You can see this. Now what they did back in those days, they would have a family monument in the middle of the plot, and there's something like 23 Dennisons in this one plot here. And then the individuals would be buried around the, as you can see over here, around the main family monument. Now this monument is really quite stunning. The sculpture on the top is stunning. If you look at the work on it, there's Henry Dennison. Okay, that work is really, really quite beautiful.
And where was he from?
Why, I think he was from the town of
Orrin.
the town of Pompey. Well, he did live in Orrin. In fact, he lived right across from the church in Orrin, up the hill. The Dennison house was up there. Well, let me show you a picture. Let me get you, first let me get, there's his individual plot, headstone. Died in December 19th, 1882. There he is, Henry D. Dennison, born in Orrin. Okay, the Dennison family was quite prominent in the hamlet of Orrin. His father was a veterinary, and so Henry decided, well, he would kind of follow in footsteps and become a doctor. And he decided that being a doctor, well, he didn't quite make enough money to suit himself, so he decided he would go into some other interests. Now you have to remember at this time, he died in 1882, 1860s, 70s, 80s, it was a time of, shall we say, corruption, slight corruption within the United States. Let's face it, you had, let me see here, what do you got? Oh, we've got swindles and frauds and corruption and scandal. You got the Grant administration, which was very, very corrupt. You have Tammany Hall, you have the Tweed Ring, you have the robber barons. Well, guess what? In Syracuse, we had the Great Canal Ring. And the canal scandal, the Syracuse Canal Ring, Syracuse Rings. Who are the canal rings allied? You know, the whole canal thing. Let's face it, the Erie Canal, it needed construction, it needed fixing, it needed additions. They had to hire contractors to do this work. Well, Henry Dennison and a couple of his cronies saw an opportunity, so they became contractors. And what they would do is they would bid low and then send a bill to New York State way, way overbid. And they would reap in the money you couldn't believe. Here, this was a little bit in the paper. Now, the amount of contract was like $10,000. The amount paid so far is $49,000. The contract is still open. That's business back in the 1880s.
It still is.
Now, let's not be cynical. Okay, but at last, the canal ring was defeated, and they do mention, look, the defeat of the canal ring. H.D. Dennison, that's him, that's Henry, is under arrest because he refused, under advice of his counsel, to produce his books. Brought before a judge in Albany and discharged from arrest. Well, he was bailed out by his buddy Elias Leavenworth. That's how he didn't wind up in jail. But the canal ring finally was brought down, and it was through mainly the efforts of Samuel Tilden, the governor of New York State. And by 1882, remember the year Henry Dennison died, it was 1882. The last of the cases decided in favor of the state. The canal ring was done. But Henry had already lined his pockets. He died a wealthy, wealthy man. And let me just ask you, I don't know. All right, let's keep moving along. We got a lot of ground to cover today. Let's see, where are we headed now, Dorothy? Oh yeah, to the just makes herself at home sitting on the headstones. But anyway, we're concerned with the Dana plot, but specifically this little monument right here. But let me show you the back of that Dana family monument. You want to know the family history? There it is. I think it goes back to the Mayflower. I mean, everybody that ever existed with a name Dana. But anyway, the Dana that we're interested in is MDHP. Why, that would be Mary Dana Hicks Prang, who was born in Syracuse, 1836, and died in 1927. Now, this lady was an educator, but she was married early in life. She was married, and that's how she was Mary Dana, and she married a gentleman named Charles Hicks in 1856. He was an attorney. He's in the Fike block. And in 1858, just 2 years after she was married, distressing accident on Wednesday, a sad accident occurred on Oneida Lake, by which Charles Hicks of Syracuse lost his life. A storm came up on Oneida Lake. You know how Oneida Lake is. They come up very rapidly. 4 gentlemen were out on a boat, and the storm came up. 3 survived the storm, 1 did not, and it was Charles Hicks. So poor Mary Dana, was Mary Dana Hicks, and she was a widow with a small child. Now this didn't stop her. She became a teacher. She was quite artistic, so she went into art education and she developed some theories, and one of her theories, I have to share this one with you. This is really kind of different. Well, color. And her theory was the color of sound. What color is that sound? In fact, when she was a little girl, maybe, I don't know, 3 years old or so, she said to her mother, "Mother, what color is my voice?" And her mother answered, "Why, Mary, I think it's a blue-violet." All right, she went on. Later in life, she became a teacher, educator, lecturer. She was down in New York City to give a lecture. She's walking down the street past the storefront. A medium, a psychic, reads palms, does all that stuff. The color of sound. She did a double take and said, "I must go in there." She went in and talked to him, and he read her palm, and he did the crystal ball thing. And then she said, "Well, sir, what color is my voice?" And he said, "Madam, would you please recite the alphabet? Madam, would you please count to 10? And they said, "Madam, I think your voice is blue-violet," just as her mother had said when she was a child. So that's the story of the color of sound. Now, she didn't let this widowhood slow her down any. She became a teacher and the superintendent of art education in the city of Syracuse. And then she was contacted by a studio, an art studio in Boston. And in 1879, she was invited to go to that studio to work with Louis Prang, who was known as the father of the American Christmas card. He was from Germany, and this is some of his work, the style of his work in the late 1800s. And Mary went to Boston, worked for him. Well, in 1901, she married Louis Prang. So here we go, Mary Dana Hicks Prang. That's how she got all those names. Now the thing is, in 1909, Louis passed away. Well, did that stop Mary? I don't think so. In 1916, she got an associate degree at Radcliffe. In 1921, at Harvard University, the second class that gave master's degrees to women, she got a master's in education at the age of 85.
Yes.
Yes. A lot of people are going, yes. You gotta give the lady credit. But one of the things that struck me as odd about Mary was that for someone who was an artist, this is a sample of her handwriting. It's really not the best. But anyway, well, let's move on a little. Let's keep going here. All right, everybody moving along okay. All right, let's look at that big pyramid. Holy mackerel, yeah. 71 feet high that pyramid is. Belongs to Cornelius Longstreet, and you notice that on the side facing Dedication Valley there is a doorway. Now Cornelius, born in Onondaga Valley, died in 1881. He was a manufacturer of clothing and also involved in the banking business. I think everybody was involved in banking in Syracuse at that time. At the time of the Civil War, he made quite a fortune making uniforms for the Union Army. He and I think it was Yates were in business together. So he had a lot of money, and you know, it's kind of odd. We go around. Let's go around to the front of that pyramid. Now, when you get to the door, well, actually, let me tell you the story. This is the original Longstreet Mausoleum on that site where that pyramid is today. And when it was built, Cornelius realized that the roof was leaking, and you know, it wasn't built all that well, and he was seeing other people putting up these fabulous monuments and mausoleums and whatnot. Cornelius said, "The heck with this thing," tore it down, and up went the actual pyramid. So there we are, we're right at the door. Now, if we could go in there, but we can't, because it's locked, this is what it would look like inside. You walked in, go down a few steps, well, oh, you got a chair, you got a nice rug, here's a chair over here, you know, maybe bring a nice bottle of wine with you and relax in the summertime and have all your dead relatives and all these halls behind you. I mean, who could spend a better Sunday afternoon? It's just what I would want to do. Yes.
Are they still there, these objects?
It's been locked up so long, I would think that they're in there and that nobody will ever see them again.
Right.
Yeah. Hopefully nobody will. So we got to keep moving along. Dorothy keeps us going. Now, you never know who you're going to bump into in this cemetery. I mean, you just don't know. There's this lady named Margaret Olivia Slocum Sage. And every now and then she comes out and she wants to talk to the public. Actually, there's her actual little headstone, Margaret Olivia Sage. And I'm telling you, you get with this lady and she'll talk your ear off about Mrs. Sage. She just loves to talk about herself. Well, let's get back to reality here. Okay, here we are. Mrs. Sage, Margaret Olivia Slocum, maiden name Slocum, married Russell Sage. That's the Russell Sage of the Russell Sage Colleges, Russell Sage Foundation. In 1869, Margaret married Russell Sage, and it was a marriage made not in heaven. They were complete opposites. She was a philanthropist and he was a tightwad. I mean, he made millions. You don't make millions by spending it. So he made millions. She liked oriental rugs and beautiful furniture, and he would bring home buffalo skins and throw them over the sofa, make her sit on moldy old dusty things. She liked beautiful art, and he would bring home pictures of railroad trains from his railroad companies. Her first Christmas present to him in 1869 was to have her mother move into their house in New York City. Merry Christmas, Russell. Here's Mom. Oh, Margaret. So anyway, there's Margaret Olivia Slocum Sage, and died in 1918. But when Russell Sage died in 1906, Margaret became the richest woman in America. I mean, and they couldn't even calculate how much money she inherited, whether it was 75 million, 150 million, there was real estate, there were railroads, you know, there was just so much that she inherited. But as I said, she was a philanthropist. And the two of them, well, there's old Skinflint Russell. Doesn't he look like a skinflint? Now, when he died in 1906, this is his mausoleum. And he's buried in Oakwood, in Troy. He's over in Troy, New York. That's where he was originally from. His family was over there. And he's buried with his first wife. First wife that he never got over. She died young, and he never got over her. But, you know, when he was a widower down in New York City in the business world, you couldn't be a widower. You had to have a lady on your arm to go to the dinners and the banquets, because that's where a lot of the networking was done. and he found that he wasn't getting the invitations, so that's why he was looking for a wife. Well, poor Margaret, she was getting on in years and didn't want to be an old maid, so it was a very, it worked well, it meshed, you know, well, but as I said, it wasn't the happiest marriage. So anyway, when this funeral took place, you'll notice that there's no name on the mausoleum. Margaret did not have sage put on the mausoleum, and she had him buried about 10 feet down in a casket that locked from the inside. So when he was, you know, closed in, that would be it. That would be it. But there was a reason for that, and we'll talk about that later. File that information away. Books have been written about both of them. Russell Sage, The Money King, and Mrs. Russell Sage. This is a modern book by Ruth Crocker that really goes into the fact that she was a giving woman. She gave to churches and hospitals and orphanages and Syracuse University. Slocum Hall is dedicated to her father, Joseph Slocum. And she established the Teachers College at Syracuse, which they no longer have, but she endowed that also. She just much that has Russell Sage on it is due to her philanthropy. And of course, the Russell Sage Foundation, still today, for the improvement of social and living conditions. And that's what they do, and they do it very well. Still today, it's a very, very wealthy foundation.
Stop together.
Yeah, okay, I got time out. These tours really wear me out. Okay, now, while we're at the Slocum, this is the other side. Remember the other side said Sage, and this side said Slocum, and her headstone, her family, mother, father, and herself are up here. Now we want to go over and look at this headstone over here. Just a short step over. Let's everybody take a peek at this. Now on one side it says, Luther Harris Hiscock, born at Pompey. Oh my God, another Pompeian. Okay, so Luther, and he died in 1867, and he was only 43 years old. Now his wife, Lucy Bridgman, died in 1861, right at the beginning of the Civil War. Now here's a picture of Luther, a lawyer, born in Pompey, set up an office with a law office with his brother down in Tully, supervisor, lawyer, justice of the peace, many offices, and then opened a law office in Syracuse. Well, okay, that's good.
Is that Hiscock and Bartlett?
Yep, that's the firm, still in business. Well, he had a friend of the family was in the Civil War, and it was Colonel George W. Cole. And George Cole owned a lumber yard in Syracuse, but when the war broke out, like everybody else, he was, you know, ready to enlist, and he went into the Civil War, and his wife was left at home in Syracuse. Mr. Hiscock, the widower, was the family lawyer. Now, while George is away, somebody has to handle the legal matters of the Cole family, and Mr. Hiscock was more than willing to come over to the Cole house and visit with Mrs. Cole, who was very lonely because her husband was away, and she was kind of a sickly person. She was a needy person, and well, things got out of hand, and I'll just leave it to your imagination. But anyway, George comes home from the war, and his wife is kind of melancholy and bereft, and doesn't look him in the eye, you know, things like that. So he's immediately suspicious, and finally she tells him, well, yeah, I had an affair with Luther Hiscock. And George is extremely angry. So what he gets his wife, and he says, we're going to go on the train, we're going to go to New York City. And what he actually did, he headed for Albany on the train with his wife. And they were headed for Stanwix Hall. Now, over in Albany was the Constitutional Convention at the time. And there were delegates from Syracuse. And who was one of the delegates but Luther Hiscock? So he's over there, he's, you know, palling it up with all his cronies at the Stanwix Hall. George Cole walks in, walks up to a group of them, and you know how they stand there and they pontificate and they have their cigars and whatnot. George Cole walks up to them, walks up to the group, and he looks at Luther Harris Hiscock. He pulls out a gun and shoots Luther Harris Hiscock. He's dead. Dead, right on spot, right in front of everybody. Now this made big news from one coast to the other. Terrible tragedy, murder. All right. Now, George Cole, of course, immediately arrested and the gun was confiscated and everything. He had some really good help. It was his brother, Cornelius, who just happened to be the United States Senator from California. So he had some backup in this case, and I'll tell you, it paid off. There are two trials. Here's the first one. Okay, the Cole trial, the jury could not agree upon a verdict. I mean, there's witnesses, everybody saw it, they couldn't agree on a verdict. All right, you got to do the trial again. Guess what? Acquittal of the prisoner. He was acquitted. You know why? The jury said when he pulled his gun out, he was sane. When he put his gun away, he was sane. When he pulled the trigger, he was insane. Not guilty by reason of insanity.
Wow.
One of the early cases of not guilty by reason of insanity. So there you go. The newspapers were livid. The headlines, murder legal in New York State. You know, they just ranted on and on and on. So, you know, he got away with it. And you mentioned the Hiscock Barkley lawyers. They have a website. And this is Frank Hiscock, his brother, and father of Frank Hiscock, who became the U.S. Senator. And it was funny, on the website, they really didn't mention much about Luther. I think they might have had his picture, and then it's gone. So, yeah, not particularly popular there. All right, well, anyway, let's keep moving right along. Let's go down this lane, and right under that tree, there's a really interesting boulder. All right, everybody gather around. And we're at the Bardeen gravesite, Charles Bardeen. Now let me see, also, that's the family monument, the family rock. Okay, and there's Charles's rock. And his daughter Ellen, her rock. And his daughter Ethel, she has a rock too. There's all the three rocks and the big rock. All right, Charles Bardeen, what a character he was. Now, you see, he died in 1924. He's from Groton, Massachusetts. He came to New York kind of late in life, but he was an educator involved in educational things. And some of you may remember Bardeen School Supplies.
Oh,
And the Bardeen store on East Genesee Street. That was begun by Charles Bardeen. Now, the thing about Charles Bardeen was he also wrote a lot. I mean, this guy was verbose. Manual of 1,500 words commonly misused, including all those, the use of which in any sense has been questioned by Dean Alfred, and all those names, and many others, arranged alphabetically with 3,000 references and quotations, and the ruling of the dictionaries by C.W. Bardeen. I think the title was longer than the book. But, you know, when he was a kid, it was at the time of the Civil War, and he was a youngster, maybe 10 or 11 years old. He wanted to go in the Civil War. He wanted to be a soldier. And he did get into the Civil War, and later on he wrote a book called The Little Fifer's War Diary. One of the best diaries, Civil War diaries written. He wrote it in 1910, long after the war, but he wrote it very well, and it's really often overlooked as a resource for Civil War researchers. It is quite a very, very good book. And look at how neat his handwriting is compared to Mary Dana Prang there. So anyway, he wanted to be a soldier. He wanted to go with the 1st Massachusetts. You know, he wanted to be one of these guys with a gun. This is the monument of the 1st Massachusetts at Gettysburg. Well, he couldn't. He was too young. So what they did, they said, well, you want to be a drummer? He said, okay. Well, the problem was, the drum was too big, he couldn't handle it, and besides, he didn't know how to play a drum. But he had some experience with a fife, and he wound up as a fifer in the 1st Massachusetts, and I believe he was present at the Battle of Gettysburg. Now, interesting thing about Bardeen is his grandson was John Bardeen, was a physicist. Died in 1991. This man, his grandson, won the Nobel Prize for Physics twice. I mean, it's awesome enough to win a Nobel Prize once, but this man won twice. What an accomplishment. Well, anyway, let's, and talking about Bardeen, I just got to tell you what kind of a personality he had. He was an old coot. He was a young coot when he was young. He got thrown out of school, and he blamed it on the principal. He said, principal was impudent to me. A little kid, you know, smack him. Anyway, he'd go into the store. His daughters were clerks at the store, and he had a house on East Genesee. So they would walk a couple blocks, and the girls knew Papa. They knew how he was. And they would see somebody coming that Father knew, and they would quick run to the other side of the street. And Charles would be going along, and he'd meet this gentleman, and the gentleman would say, "Why, good morning, Miss Bardeen, isn't it a beautiful day?" And Charles Bardeen would say something like, "Well, what makes you think it's so beautiful? I think it was going to rain. I don't care what you say, I think it's going to rain. Good day, sir." You know, just one of those charming gentlemen that we every now and then run into. All right, let's get away from Charles and move up the hill. All right, let's keep going.
What relation to Bardeen Road at all? Down here?
Bardeen
Bardeen
Road?
Road? No?
Not familiar with it.
Just off
Yeah.
Keady, just south of Fabius.
Yeah, I would say probably there are other Bardeens in the family. Ellen and Ethel did not marry, so they, you know, there were no offspring.
Yeah.
Somewhere there was an offspring because there was a grandson, but you know, he went on to New York City and on to bigger things.
There must have been a son.
Probably, yeah, right, because the grandson was Bardeen. Okay, so just up the hill from Bardeen is the Sumner Monument, a canopied tomb with Edwin Vaux Sumner and his wife Hannah. And this is what it looked like around the turn of the century. And Major General Sumner, he was born in Boston, but he spent 44 years in the United States Army. I mean, he was a lifelong Army person. He died in 1863. What happened was, in the Civil War, he was reassigned to a Western Army from the Army of the Potomac, so he had to go west. So the normal transport route was to go to New York City, Albany, across Syracuse, Buffalo, Cleveland, Chicago, and on west. That was the normal way they would go. He had family in Syracuse. He had a daughter, Sarah Sumner Teal. She married into the Teal family of Teal Avenue. Okay, the Teal Avenue is named for that family. So General Sumner is in Syracuse in March of 1863. You know, he's like 65 years old. He comes to Syracuse in March. You know what the weather's like. He catches a cold, it goes into bronchitis, it goes into pneumonia, and the poor man dies. Now, being in the Army all his life, he didn't have any home base, you know, like a place where he really lived. His wife stayed with his daughter in Syracuse. Yes, Barbara.
Oh, I just noticed he was born in Sackett's Harbor. Was
Now
his,
I think,
that's his wife?
She is.
yeah.
This is Sarah. Sarah was born in Sackett's Harbor. Another son was born in Carlisle,
I was just gonna
Pennsylvania.
say, they
They were all
traveled.
over.
Yeah.
Had no home base. So when he died, you know, what are they going to do with him? Well, they decided to put him in the Teal family plot. So that's how we got a major general from the Civil War, a corps commander, right in Syracuse. Now, the husband of Sarah, okay, by the way, she lived to be, I don't know, 90, almost 90-something years old, was William Teal, William Walter Teal, who was on the staff of General Sumner during the Civil War. And here it says he died November 4th, 1899. The oddest obituary you'll probably ever see.
Oh my goodness.
Fatal hiccups. Next time you get the hiccups, you better call 911. It could be fatal. I don't quite know how that works, but poor Mr. Teal died of fatal hiccups. And let's see here, who else am I gonna talk about? Oh, okay, yeah, the whole family, Sumner's whole family was Army. He had a son, Sammy, who became a general in the Union Army. His son, Edwin Jr., became a general in the Union Army. The grandson, who's buried over here, George, was killed in the war. A son-in-law, Jenkins, who was killed in the Mexican War. His daughter, Nancy, married Jenkins. Now, his daughters kind of got off the track. They married, well, this gravesite is his daughter, Margaret, who married a colonel in the Civil War, except he was a Confederate colonel, Colonel McLean. And Colonel McLean is buried right there, and Darothy always has to go and read the headstone, make sure he's still there. But can you imagine, General Sumner's in his grave, he's probably kicking with that right foot, kicking that McLean, you bum. The other daughter married Armistead Long, who was a colonel in the Confederate Army. And it's like, dinners at the Sumner place must have been really, really interesting. Some interesting discussions. And if you're walking around the Oakwood Cemetery at dusk, it's just, getting dark, just take a look up at the Sumner. You might even see the general. You might even be out. Yeah. All right, let's get going. I'm heading off. Follow me. Will you people come, Darothy, get them going, will you? I mean, really, please. My gosh, all right, well, all right, they're catching up, that's good. Well, while I'm waiting for you, let me show you one of those live oaks that's in Oakwood Cemetery. Look at the size of that tree. There are a number of the original oaks that are there. The Labor Day storm of a few years ago badly damaged many trees in the cemetery, including many of the old oaks, but the size of those trees is just unbelievable. So anyway, all right, we're going to get to the Leavenworth Foreman mausoleum, Leavenworth, and if you look under there it says Foreman and Leavenworth, and this is always my favorite stop because I get to sit down and Darothy gets to do the work.
Now?
Yes, now. Okay, give me a water. You're on.
I'm on. Okay.
Get on the right page.
Right page. Okay, the Leavenworth tomb was also the final resting place of Joshua Foreman, but we'll get to that in a minute. Though not born in Syracuse, Elias Leavenworth arrived here from Columbia County in 1827. Now, about 20 years later, he was elected mayor of Syracuse, and he was only the second mayor so elected. As a practicing attorney, General Leavenworth served on many prestigious boards of directors, banks, Oakwood Cemetery, the New York State Historical Society, as well as being elected to the New York State Assembly, and he also served as Secretary of State in Albany. In addition, he served one term as U.S. Congressman in Washington, but declined renomination. And by the way, he earned the rank of Brigadier General in the New York State Militia, in which he faithfully served. Now, he was immensely concerned with the beautification projects, the elm trees planted on James Street until they were hit with the Dutch elm disease in the 1950s, as well as the design for Fayette Park on East Genesee Street. And it was under his direction that the quagmires in downtown Syracuse were drained, filled in, and made habitable. His home was on the northeast corner of James Street. As you're going up James, it'd be on the right-hand side, northeast corner of James and McBride. It was referred to as one of the greatest houses in the country. Sad to say, it was demolished in 1950 to make way for a modern office building. The old general lived to be 84 years old. He died in 1887 and is buried here in Oakwood Cemetery. Now, on to Joshua Foreman. Actually, Joshua Foreman was born before General Leavenworth in 1777 down in Dutchess County. He too is mainly forgotten, except for a short street. It's only 4 or 5 blocks between Almond and Irving Avenue. However, there is in Foreman Park on East Genesee Street. Now, let's meet the man for whom the park and the street are named. Joshua Foreman has been called the father of Syracuse. He designed Clinton Square, Hanover Square, and Armory Square. But his greatest accomplishment was in the completion of the Erie Canal. He was a member of the New York State Assembly when he proposed a resolution for a survey to begin the process of creating a waterway from Albany to Buffalo. And by 1825, he accompanied Governor DeWitt Clinton from Syracuse to the Hudson River on the newly opened canal and to witness the ceremonial mixing of the waters of Lake Erie with those of the Atlantic Ocean. Now, the reason that Joshua Foreman is here in the Leavenworth tomb is because he is the father of General Leavenworth's first wife. In other words, he was his father-in-law. His being in Syracuse is a story unto itself. By 1826, he removed to New Jersey and then to Rutherford County, North Carolina. It was there in the mountains of North Carolina that he passed away, 1848, at age 71. Now, he was originally buried there, but later, in the 1870s, his son-in-law, General Leavenworth, had him disinterred, packed up, and sent home to Syracuse. Well, here's where the story gets good. A Leavenworth servant went to the station when the package containing Mr. Foreman arrived, and so when he was delivered to the Syracuse station, he was picked up by the servant, brought back to the Leavenworth mansion. But no one was at home at the time, so the guy put the box in the hall closet under the stairs and forgot about it. Sometime later, General Leavenworth inquired about the delivery, and it was then that the forgotten box came to light. So Joshua Foreman was finally reburied here in Syracuse in the Leavenworth plot, and as they say, all's well that ends well.
That was a close one. All right.
How long was the coffin in the closet?
Well, it was small because it was many years later, so there were just remains. So it was a small package. It wasn't a casket. It was a small
Right.
package, so, yeah.
The flesh had deteriorated so it didn't smell.
Yeah, you explain that, Nancy. It was all dust and bones, yeah, that's what it was. All right, gang, we gotta keep moving along here. Now, I wanna take you to a really bizarre grave site. Now, this is the Kendall family. You can read right there, Kendall. And over on the side, it says Hervey W. Kendall, MD, died in 1881. Now, Hervey Kendall, born in 1854, died in 1882. It's incorrect on the headstone. It actually was 1882. Now, he was a medical doctor, but he called himself a resurrectionist. And if you don't know what that means, there you go. Body snatcher, grave robber. Well, back in those days, and there's pictures of the grave robbers at work, medical schools needed cadavers to teach with, anatomy, physiology, and they didn't have arrangements worked out with hospitals. They kind of had a black market going on, and people would go to graveyards of newly buried individuals, rob the grave, bring it to the school, and they could get as much as $1,000, $1,500.
They got $50.
the expert on grave robbing says $50,
$50, which is now worth $50.
now worth $1,500. So it was quite a lucrative business that Dr. Kendall was in. And there's a picture of the Syracuse University Medical College, which was on the site where Peck Hall is now on East Genesee Street. And at least they had a sense of humor. They, did the skeleton with the College of Medicine hat. They weren't all stuffed shirts. So anyway, here was an ad I found. Russell Sage's Ghoul-Proof Vault. Remember Russell Sage was buried in that vault that locked from the inside?
Right.
That was because of grave robbers. He died in 1906. Now it was beginning to wane. Laws were being passed, but back in the 1880s, this was a big problem. And often what the grave robbers would do, or body snatchers, they would rob the body, steal the body of a very wealthy person and hold it for ransom.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so, they developed the Ghoul-Proof Vault, which locked from the inside. Oh, something else they developed, and that was the grave torpedo. And this is from the actual patent. And it was something that went on top of the casket, and if anybody tried to dig down to the casket, it would explode. But I think too many times people burying the casket were injured by when it inadvertently exploded. Plus it did great damage to the dearly departed, and it soon lost favor. But, a very ingenious idea to take care of this. So, old Hurry Kendall, one of his prime resources was the Onondaga poorhouse. The indigent were buried in the pauper cemetery, often didn't have caskets, wrapped in linen sheet. And he would go up there, and as a doctor, he would go through the infirmary, and he would eye the persons that he thought were going to die very, very shortly. And when they died, the next night, he would go up there and go to the graveyard in the dead of the night, no pun intended, and dig up the body and take it to be sold. Well, in May of 1882, one morning, the caretaker's looking out the window and he sees this something out in the cemetery. He goes out and there's Hervey Kendall laying out in the graveyard with a bullet in his forehead, but he's still alive. He was able to say his name, but he would not say who had shot him. At first they thought, oh, it was suicide, but he had all his tools with him. There were tracks from a wagon that was, led away. It was a grave robbing gone bad, and Hervey Kendall was mortally wounded and died the next day. Even, years afterwards, this was like in 1904 or something, the gang robbed over 300 graves 21 years ago. 300 bodies, and they could have been in any, like Camillus, they could have been in any of the surrounding areas. I don't know, Fayetteville, did they have problems with that in Fayetteville, Barbara? Oh, okay. They were fortunate.
I think the 300 graves is hyperbole.
Well, this guy was, talking 21 years later, and, so I guess maybe we can take it with a slight grain of salt. But I'm going to warn you again, if you're walking up in the cemetery in that dusk, just in that in-between time, keep your eye open, you never know what you're going to see. All right, let's get going. All right, we got one more site to visit, and we're going to the Westcott plot. And Dorothy's right down there in the middle of it. And we're going to talk about Amos Westcott. Now, this is the Westcott family stone, which is in the middle, and then all the Westcotts are buried around the edge. Now, Amos Westcott, 1815 to 1873, he was a dentist, and quite a father of New York dentistry, he was called in one. And this, I think, is a 1939 newspaper, tribute to an early pioneer in Syracuse dentistry. That is Dr. Amos Westcott. Now, another claim to fame, he was mayor of Syracuse at the time of the beginning of the Civil War in early 1861. Republican mayor of Syracuse. Now, the Republican president-elect had to get from Springfield, Illinois to Washington, D.C., so going that backward route from Chicago to Cleveland, Buffalo, Syracuse, President-elect Abraham Lincoln came through Syracuse, New York by train. So Amos Westcott, being a good Republican, said, well, we're going to have a big to-do, we'll have a big platform and bunting and flags, and it's just going to be a huge event and whatnot. And the train pulls in, and Lincoln comes out on the back of the train, and he looks at all this big, 10,000 people there, and, flags and red, white, and blue, and he said, such a large platform, you must expect a rather large speech, for which I have neither the time nor the energy. Goodbye. And the train pulled out. So Amos's good intentions. The people did get to see the president, but he did not deliver an address. Now, it gets even more bizarre with Amos Westcott. He was involved with the Cardiff Giant. And this, over down in the valley there in Cardiff, everybody knows the story of the Cardiff Giant. Well, this thing went on tour. It was, P.T. Barnum was interested in it, and investors, the perpetrators asked for investors, and Amos Westcott was one of the investors. And in fact, if you look at there's a ticket to look at the Giant, and there's Amos Westcott signing the ticket, allowing a person to go in and view the Cardiff Giant. Well, it was a hoax. Only a couple years later, it was totally found to be a hoax, and now it resides over in Cooperstown in the Farmers Museum. But Amos Westcott was humiliated, embarrassed, and became very depressed over the whole thing. And in 1873, Amos Westcott committed suicide. Now, I have to tell you about his son, Edward Noyes Westcott. Now, that name might be ringing a little bell, the author of David Harum. But to talk about, Edward Westcott, I have to tell you about the Westcott curse. And this is bizarre also. And it's funny when, we take school kids, like either university students or public school kids, and they're all gathered around Dorothy and I in the plot, and I tell them, anybody standing in this plot may be affected by the Westcott curse. Step back. They all step back. Okay, all right, here we go. Amos Westcott committed suicide 1873. His son, the author, died of TB in 1898 as a young man. The book was published after Edward died. His friend Forbes Heerman finished the book, had it published, and it became a national bestseller, and Edward never knew. Edward had died. Harold Westcott, a grandson, died of TB. Edward's son, Harold, in 1904. Frank, another son of Edward, committed suicide in 1915. Philip Westcott, a grandson, committed suicide in 1926. And then Violet Westcott Moravitz, granddaughter, 1918. And she is probably the weirdest story of all. She married a lawyer in New York City. So she lived down in New York City, but she was kind of sickly. And around 1918, there was influenza and everything going around. So she thought she would go to California where the weather was better for her health. So to go to California from New York City, of course, she went to Albany, Syracuse, Buffalo, and that. So she telegraphed her friends here in Syracuse, and she said, I'm going to be on such and such a train on such and such a day. Come to the station and meet me, and we'll get together. So the day came, the appointed day. In the meantime, Violet had passed away. Nobody told her friends. The casket was on the train.
Oh.
The train comes up, comes to Syracuse. Her friends are there, waiting. Well, where's Violet? Looking at the people coming off the train. Where's Violet? finally they said to the conductor, you know, where's Mrs. Moravitz? And he said, oh, she died, she's in that casket. Bummer. Oh, so anyway, that's the story of the Westcott curse, and just bizarre. And there's Violet's, her headstone is there in the cemetery too. So anyway, let's get back to the chapel, and because I'm done talking about all these famous and intriguing people, but you know, we hate to toot our own horn, but I guess I better just do it a little bit. Oakwood is on the National Register of Historic Places. It has been awarded a award of merit by the Upstate History Alliance for the Oakwood Cemetery Guided Tours. You know, when you have guided tours with titles like Dames, Damsels, and Dingbats, and what were some of the others? Doctors, dentists, and quacks. You know, people just come out just because the title sounds so intriguing, and that's Dorothy's bailiwick. She comes up with that stuff. And also a preservation award from the Preservation Association of Central New York. So cemetery is doing some good work. HOCPA is doing some good work up there. And well, I don't know how Dorothy feels this way, but that's about how I feel, so I'm just going to leave it with that. And I'm going to ask Dorothy to just tell you a couple things about what's coming up this year, what you have to look forward to. She's ready to jump right out of that chair. Jumping, look at her jump.
Okay. Number one, as I said, Oakwood Cemetery is just a wonderful, rich place. We just love it. In fact, we're called cemetery hoppers. And
Among
so,
other things.
yeah. And we have a very, very, very good book that has just been written this past year by Barbara Rivette. Oakwood, a special place, which is a wonderful title because it is a very special place. We have some copies up here, if anyone would like to purchase it. It tells all about, and wonderful photography, tells about the cemetery, and it's
And it was done for the 150th anniversary of the cemetery.
so that's a keeper. That's a
And
good.
it comes with a map.
And
Yeah,
yes,
right.
that
And
was
that map is
very,
wonderful.
very helpful. Very helpful. And the tours coming up, we do one a month, starting in May, going through September. And we usually start in May with a professor from ESF who talks about the trees or the planting or the designs. In May, on May 22nd, we're going to have Professor George Curry, who's going to talk about, we like to call it from the ground up, but his title is Howard Daniels Landscape Design. He was the landscape gardener that they hired to design the original cemetery. So he's going to talk about that. On June 26th, now this is really neat, we've got Greg Tripoli, the executive director of the OHA, Onondaga Historical Association, and he's going to be our tour guide, and he's going to talk about the mayors. We have many, many mayors of Syracuse buried in Oakwood, and he's going to come up with a quirky title, he said, so I don't know what his title is yet. We have July 21st, August 21st, that might not, and September 25th. We're going to, Michael Flouchet, who's with the Preservation Association, will probably be one of our guides during that time. And, why I'm a little blank on some of this. The last one, on September 25th, is Forever Young, or also known as the Wee Ones. And we're going to talk about some of the children that died and are buried in Oakwood. One of them being Milton Price, his little son Willie. Willie is buried in Oakwood. And Olivia Holmes was drowned in Onondaga Lake when she was 15. She's one of the older little ones. So we're going to do a lot of research on that. Also, in connection with the tours, this year the OHA, the Onondaga Historical Association, is going to have their ghost tours in Syracuse in June, 2 weekends, Friday and Saturday of each weekend, the 17th and the 18th, and the 24th and the 25th.
And that's at the cemetery, you said in Syracuse, but it's at the cemetery.
Yeah, they're going to have
So
their
this is,
tours.
that's gonna be spooky.
Well, luckily, I think it'll still be light.
Maybe not.
I don't know. And they will have tour guides that will take care of that. So I think, unless there are any questions, I think we,
Well, let me just say, if you're interested in receiving a newsletter from HOCPA, not necessarily joining HOCPA, but just getting a newsletter, they put out so far one a year, getting the schedule and finding out some stuff. I have a sign-up sheet. You're welcome to sign up and get the newsletter. And come to some of the tours. You really would be surprised. And one that I think she forgot to mention was potpourri in section 3. Some of the little known facts. I mean, there's famous people in section 3, Margaret Olivia and the Denison, we know about those, but what about some of those, not everybody's famous, but everybody has a story. And with that, I'm stopping right here.
Well, I told you you'd get a good program, right? We have some also good refreshments, so they're in there. Right? They're gonna be coming out.
Need help?